welcome back. Here we are to continue talking about SwiftUI and building our calculator app, or kind of a mock-up of the calculator. It's hard to beat the Apple one; it works pretty good, but I think we can simulate it, right? So far we've used SwiftUI to draw the interface for the calculator, and that's what SwiftUI is made for, right? That's its job. Okay, it's made for creating the user interface. The next step is to create the the logic and the code that actually runs the application itself, right? So it handles like adding up the numbers, subtracting numbers, clearing the screen, displaying or calculating the value that's displayed on the screen. Displaying the value is part of the content view and the user interface, right? Okay. So, SwiftUI kind of looks like the code that you would write to do the business logic and, calculate the numbers, but it's not really. It's just here for displaying the user interface, okay? So how are we going to create the code that runs the app, right? That is like the engine behind the app, right? Well, let's do that. I'm going to make a brand new file first, and we're going to this file is going to be the file that contains the code that runs the calculator, right? So I'm going to make a new file. So I can do Command N. I'll choose iOS as the type and Swift file as the kind of file I want to create. Click Next, and then I'm going to make a file. I'm going to call it global state, okay? And I can just save it to my folder here, and there it is. And what we want to do is we want to create a new class in here. Okay, so this class will be a great place because it can store methods. It can also have properties, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to be able to share those methods and properties with our view. So the view will call methods here, and it will observe the properties here and work with them to display, say, the value on the screen. So I'm going to name my class global state. So this is kind of best practice, is if you have a file, and you have a class defined in that file or an enum defined in that file, you name the file after the object it contains, right? Key for us here is that our class is going to extend the observable object class. So after the colon here, I'm going to put observable object, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a variable here called display, right? And maybe display can be 1.168 or something, right? I think that's the golden ratio, right? So I've got my display, and imagine that display, like this property right here, is what we want to use to display the value here. So when things are working, the screen should display 1.168, right? So when we've connected the two, that will happen, right? So in order for that to happen, what we're going to do is we're going to mark this property with a special keyword here. I'm going to say published, right? So what I'm telling the system here is that, hey, this value is published to the world, right? So other objects are looking at this value inside this observable object, right? And when it changes, they should be aware, or they should know that a change has occurred, so they can update their view or take some kind of action. Okay. So again, like the global state's going to be where our logic happens. So I've got properties here, and the global state can also have functions. So maybe I'm going to say key pressed is a function. And this is where we can have, some logic, like when you press a key on the keyboard or of the calculator here, it can call the method here, and this method can update the display. And since display is published, then, the outer app will be able to update and display the new value for display, right? Okay, so this is set up pretty good. We'll come back here and do a lot of work here later, but for right now, I think this is enough. Okay, great. So now what we need to do is back in content view, we need to connect the global state with the rest of the calculator, right? Or with the view of the calculator anyway, the content view. We need to connect global state and content view together. So I'm going to go into the content view at the top here, and I'm going to make a brand new variable, okay? and we'll call it, env, and actually call it global state. I don't know. I'm going to do env because it's shorter, right? So let's do env, and I'm going to set the type to global state. Now, normally you'd want to make an instance here, right? So you do something like this, but since we're using the global state, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I'm going to mark this variable. So on the left side here, I'm going to mark it as an environment variable. Wait, an environment object, okay? So I'm going to mark this as an environment object. And so, in this way, Swift will be aware that this thing is something out in the ether that we can pull in from, from the environment, okay? So this is almost there. We're not quite done yet, okay? You'll notice here it doesn't give me an error for not assigning a value because it knows since it's an environment object, the value is going to come from outside. So what we need to do next is we need to figure out where outside is and make sure that this gets initialized out there in the ether, right? I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. And in this particular file, where that happens is right here. Okay, now note that at the top here, we're defining a struct called content view, and this is where our view is defined. It's not the view that you actually see here. Okay, this view is used to create the view over here, but the view isn't created until we get down to the bottom, and this line of code creates the view. So here, with the parentheses on the end of content view, this is where we're creating a new instance of content view. Okay? So while we're creating that new instance, I'm going to also tack on the end here, I'm going to say environment object, right? And I'm going to choose this one from the menu where it says environment object, initialize it with an object, okay? And then it says, hey, I want an observable object. And we just made one of those, right? So I'm going to type in here global state and use the parentheses. So this is going to initialize the global state, pass it into our content view as an environment object. And from there, our view can use the values from this environment object, right? And we'll just use it as env for environment, okay? Okay, great. So that's working pretty good. There's no errors, so we're doing well. Now remember the number here, 3.14, is displayed in this H stack right here in the text object, right? And what I'd like to do is I'd like to grab that display variable off of the global state. So global state right here has a property called display that's being published, and we'd like to pull that in and display it here inside the text. So I'm going to type in .env or env.display, and then that should hopefully display our value here. I'm going to, for some reason this isn't updating. It says automatic preview updating paused. I'm going to click the resume button and see if it's going to work for me. Oh, there it worked, right? So I got 1.168, right? And if we were to go back to our global state and change the number here to, actually we just say hello, right? Then hopefully over here, if we resume our preview again, actually, this should work, right? I noticed that sometimes this thing, you have to kind of kick it to make it work, right? And it's not cooperating right now. Don't worry about that. I think if you close this even and open it again, then it'll work. But don't worry about that. It was working a second ago. We'll just stick with it, right? Let's try one more thing. So let's imagine, actually I'm going to go back here and change this global state from hello. I'm going to just make it 0 because that's really what I want, right? Like I want the calculator to start with a 0. Let's see if it works this time. Yeah, it's still not cooperating. Don't worry about that, right? We're going to ignore it. So our next step here is that when you tap on a key, what I want to do is I want to print that key inside the display here, right? So I'm going to scroll all the way down, and you can see I've got all these buttons here. I use this function make button, right? So this made all my buttons. You know what I want to do too is actually I want to make a couple of quick changes here. I like these buttons, but this orange equal sign, I really want to make that green, right? And then what I want to do is instead of doing width of 146 here, I'm going to change the 0 to, width of 146. There we go. I think that's how I want my calculator to look, right? So I've been thinking about that for a while, and I just saw this and I thought I'm gonna fix that right now. So anyway, so this is kind of good that we have these features set up here, so we can set the color. You know, every button can have its own color. We can also change the width, right? Okay. So remember, you know, when we call make button, we pass in the key, so the button can have a label and know which key in the enum it is, right? And we pass in these other parameters, and this function is responsible for returning a view, right? So if I look at the make button function, it returns a view, and that view is a button. So the view for the button is all of the code here that I have selected. Actually, really what this is it looks like this, right? So it's got button, and then it's got action colon, and then and there's something here, some curly brackets, right? And then there's a label property, right? And this label property has some stuff in it, right? And basically it has another view object, right? Which is, for us, it's a text object. Okay, so the action right here is something that our button can do. It's some code that the button can run. Okay, and right here is where I have my action, and then here is the label, right? So what we want to do is we want to call on env, and if I say env dot, you can see I can access display, and then there's the key pressed function, right? So we can take key pressed, and we can press the button, and or tap on one of the buttons, and it will call the function here in global state. Okay, so so that's looking pretty good. Let's add a little bit of stuff here, right? So for fun, I'm going to go into the calculator, or into the global state, and when you press a key, I'd like to know which key it is. So inside the key pressed function, I'm going to add a parameter, and it will be type calculator key, right? And then maybe, like, if we do that, what we'll do is we'll say display equals display plus key.raw value, right? So remember, our calculator keys, the enum stores each key as a string, and so in code we're going to use this name, but if I say raw value, I get the value here, right? So this isn't going to solve all of our calculator problems, but it will take the key that you pressed and then add it on to the end of display, and then hopefully that should update our view here in content view. Okay, so that means that here I have a problem. I feel like my Xcode is kind of choking right now, because it should be giving me an error right here for that environment, right? Because it would see that the name is missing, right? So let's add that in. I'm going to say key as the parameter here, or as the label, and then I'm going to put the key in there. So now when you tap on a button, it's going to take the key from the button, which would be like equal or dot or 0 or plus or whatever, and then pass it through this environment function. And when we go to the global object, it should update the display. And updating display, since display is published, it should take us back up to here and display it in our text field, right? I'm going to resume this. And oh yeah, there, I got the zeros finally showing up, right? Let's try it out now. So I'm going to click this play button right here, and the play button kind of, you'll notice like it adds these little buttons on the side of the view here. So now it's kind of like this is acting like the phone. So this is going to simulate the logic of our app. And you can see when I tap on the buttons, it tacks on the number on the end of the display, and then it updates here. So now we know everything's working. This is great. Okay, so thanks for watching. Actually, before you stop, let's add one more thing here. I just remembered one other feature that I wanted to make sure that I covered, right? So Here, I added content view environment object. So I'm at the very bottom of content view, looking at the content view previews, right? And this is good for, or this works for the canvas preview here. But when the app is actually running, like when we publish and we actually run it on a real device, we'll need to actually do this in another spot. So I'm going to go to the SwiftUI example app. So this is the name of my app file right here. So find that. If you named your app something else, this will have a different name, but find that name here, right? And it should be, you know, something app, I think, .swift, right? And you can see here it's got a struct, it's SwiftUI example app, and it extends app, right? And you can see that we're also creating a content view here. So let me ask you, challenge yourself, what do you need to do here? Okay, let's try it. So what we need to do is we need to set the environment object. So I'm going to start typing environment object, and I'll use the code hints to help me out here. And the object that we want to create here is global state, and we want to create an instance of that. Okay, so that covers everything for right now. Thanks for watching. I hope that that was interesting, and I'll see you in the next video.